Welcome back to the Awesome Agents podcast. So Maya, Anthropic is suing the Pentagon. I didn't have that on my 2026 bingo card.
Right, and it's not some small procedural complaint either. This is a direct challenge to a supply chain risk designation, the kind of label usually reserved for companies tied to China or Russia.
Okay, so let me make sure I understand what happened. The Pentagon wanted Anthropic to drop its safety guardrails on Claude for military use. Anthropic said no, and now the government is basically treating them like a foreign adversary?
That is essentially what happened, yeah. Defense Secretary Hegseth invoked a statute called 10 USC 3252, which was designed to protect the military supply chain from foreign threats. He applied it to an American company because they refused to remove two specific safety policies:
And those two policies are?
no mass domestic surveillance and no fully autonomous weapons. Those are Anthropic's red lines. They were willing to work with the Pentagon on everything else, but those two things were non negotiable.
Okay, here is what gets me though. Didn't OpenAI just sign a deal with the Pentagon that has the exact same red lines?
Yes, literally hours after Trump blacklisted Anthropic, OpenAI struck a deal with the same two restrictions. Sam Altman even said publicly that the DoD agrees with those principles.
So the Pentagon punished one company and rewarded another for the exact same position? That is, how do you explain that?
You kind of can't, which is why Senator Warner is calling it a potential pretext to steer contracts to a preferred vendor. And that isn't a fringe take. That's the vice chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee saying that.
Let's talk about the actual legal arguments here. Does Anthropic have a real case?
Legal experts seem to think so, actually. There are two main angles. First, the supply chain statute requires the Pentagon to exhaust less intrusive alternatives before applying it. Hegseth went from ultimatum to blacklisting in 4 days. That's a tough timeline to defend.
So they skipped the negotiation steps that the law requires.
Basically. And there's a second problem for the government. They also threatened to use the Defense Production Act to force Anthropic to build an unguarded version of Claude. But that law was designed for steel mills and tank factories, not for compelling a company to retrain an AI model.
Can they actually do that? Just order a company to build a product it doesn't make?
Legal analysts are pretty skeptical. The DPA lets the government order priority production of things a company already produces. Anthropic doesn't produce a guardrail-free Claude. Multiple experts told Defense Scoop they do not expect the government to prevail on that argument.
Dario Amodei made a point I thought was really sharp. He said the government is contradicting itself by calling Anthropic a security risk and also saying Claude is essential to national security.
Yeah, that's a real logical problem. You can't simultaneously argue a company is too dangerous to work with and too important not to conscript. Pick one.
Now let us talk about the money side. How much does losing a Pentagon contract actually hurt Anthropic?
The contract itself was about $200 million, which is roughly 1.4% of their annual revenue, barely a rounding error. But the supply chain designation is way more dangerous.
Because it's not just about the Pentagon directly, right?
Exactly. It is a secondary boycott. Every company in the defense supply chain, contractors, subcontractors, partners at any tier, now has to prove it has no commercial relationship with Anthropic. For a company whose enterprise business depends on large corporations, many of which hold defense contracts, that could be devastating.
And they have an IPO planned for this year.
Right, they just raised $30 billion at a $380 billion valuation. Whether this designation spooks investors or actually rallies them around a company standing on principle is the big open question.
What about public opinion? Is the government winning that fight?
Not really. A recent survey found 67% of Americans believe tech companies have a responsibility to set limits on their products, even when the government disagrees. And 50% viewed penalizing Anthropic as government overreach.
So the framing of AI safety as some kind of political issue isn't landing with the public?
It does not appear to be, no. There was also a bipartisan group of senators who tried to intervene. Both Republican and Democrat defense leaders sent a letter urging more negotiation time. But the letter arrived after the deadline had already passed.
So where does this go from here? What is the big picture takeaway?
I think this case will set a precedent that goes way beyond AI. If the government wins, it means any company's internal safety policies can be overridden by a national security label. If Anthropic wins, it establishes that you can't weaponize supply chain designations to punish companies for normal contract negotiations.
So this is really about whether the government can tell private companies how to design their products.
That's exactly what it comes down to, and I think a lot of companies in tech and beyond are watching this very closely.
Big story, and we'll definitely be following it. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll catch you on the next one.